Over the last couple weeks of school, I've been using a Ziploc bag for all of my lunches. You know, I'm not going to buy lunch at school, it's expensive. But I think it's time to make a more permanent solution. So I'm going to be using this multi-gas detector box that's really old and antique, and I'm going to be converting it into a really cool vintage Art Deco-ish lunchbox. So here are a couple different photos of the box. What I really like about it are its rounded corners, the latch, and also the color. The color looks really cool. What I'm not so much of a fan of are all of the little rust spots, so I'm definitely going to want to get rid of that. Unfortunately, there's a metal structure inside of the box that I'm going to have to remove, but I'm hoping that that's going to be relatively easy because they're only spot welded in. Okay, so now after little to no effort, the middle pieces are removed. So if we take a look inside, it is completely empty. Things are still kind of sharp, so I'm just going to give it a coat of paint. So here it is directly after paint. Looks pretty good. So, as I may or may not have alluded to, depending on the editing of this video, I came up with a really neat solution for all of the previously rusty spots. I'm going to be copper plating the metal. This is going to look really neat with the blue, blue copper, kind of good colors together. But for this I'm going to need to reach down to the project box for a couple things. So, I'm going to need some copper acetate, a multimeter, a not sketchy power supply, some aluminum tape, a small vessel to pour the copper acetate into, and an applicator. This is a rolled up sock covered with a copper wire. So when you come on closer, we can get into it. Now that you're closer, let's get started. So I'm going to start by turning on my power supply. It requires a couple of different switches because I have that for safety. Now that it's turned on, we're just going to check the polarity of the wires because that's important for copper plating. So we're just going to take your multimeter, and if the multimeter goes this way, that means that the polarity is correct. So it's correct. This is the negative end. So I'm going to attach the negative end onto the item that I want to plate, and I'm going to do that using the aluminum tape. So just tear off a piece. I find tearing it like this makes it easier to separate off of its sticker, otherwise you get stuck. Take it and slap that down onto your piece of metal. The piece of metal also needs to be really clean, and if there's something on it, it won't stick. So if it's not working, that's what it is. So for the next part, we're going to attach this to our applicator just by tucking it under one of these pieces of copper and giving it a little bend just to make sure it's contacting there. Okay, now we're almost ready. We're just going to dump some copper acetate into our little jar. Make sure you don't spill any of it because it's quite toxic and it could make you sick. So you're just going to give a little dip, and then you can get plating. It's not instantaneous, but depending on your settings, so right now I'm at 12 volts and unknown amperage, so you can start seeing the effects quite quickly. So not yet. I'm just going to turn it up a little bit for fun. And I'm just going to keep moving it ever so slightly so it doesn't build up too much in either spot. So it's been about 30 seconds, and I'm just going to lift it up. And you should be able to put that down so I don't get electrocuted, and you should be able to see the copper has started to build up. It's a little bit bad looking on this, but in smaller doses like the nicks and crannies and bruises of the lunchbox, it's going to look really neat. As you can see in the video, it's definitely plating, but the result in person isn't as good as I'd like it, so I'm just going to polish up and clear coat the rest of the rust spots instead of plating them. I am going to keep these ones copper because it still looks cool, just not as cool as I'd like. Unfortunately, this video is going to end on a little bit of a cliffhanger because there just isn't enough time in the weekend. So tune in next week for part 2 where I finish polishing all of the rust spots and design some custom containers for the inside so I can store my food more efficiently.